Kevin Murray.
Thanks, Janet. And it's wonderful to see so many people here for this conference. I think it's really strong testimony to the strength of ceramics in Australia at the moment. So I think it's turning out extremely well. What I wanted to do in 15 minutes was to address the issue of the Asian century from a fairly broad perspective, looking at a number of different angles on it, but to hone in on one at the end, which I think is one of the interesting creative possibilities that's opened up, and in a way reflects that refrain, that beautiful refrain from Tanya Harrod's talk this morning of born, not made. Okay, so to begin, in terms of the Asian century, the dominant thing we've seen is obviously the movement of labour away from the industrial centres in the West to those in the East. And offshoring has been celebrated as a win-win historical situation where more than 1 billion people have been taken out of poverty in China, and in the West we've received the benefit of cheap consumer goods as the costs have gone down. And this has been something which has been an amazing engine in late capitalism. Oops, sorry, seem to have missed a slide there, but that then came to an end. We saw the limits of that with the Rana Plaza collapse 2 years ago, where in Bangladesh we found that the people who were making the clothes that we wear were essentially risking their lives in order to be able to go to work every day, which was such a shocking thing, which has led to a reconsideration now, and we see phenomenon of what people call onshoring, as many of the industries are now being relocated in the West, and China certainly is undergoing quite a transformation. Outside the industrial, in the crafts, there have also been a number of cases where production has been offshored. For instance, Anne Black, the Danish ceramicist, has been working in Vietnam in terms of extending her production, scaling up her handmade because of the skill that's available in Vietnam, and the low costs has been something which has given her a profit margin that enables her to continue quite well. But in this kind of paradigm, you don't really see any evidence of the Vietnamese who are making the work, and the designs are very much the Danish, Scandinavian designs that we're familiar with. There's very little interaction between that. Sorry, that was the Rana Plaza one. But in the case of ceramics, and I know that Sandra Barkett's going to be talking more tomorrow about this, but we see, for instance, in the way in which Australian ceramicists work with potters in Asian countries, a degree of appreciation, particularly for the folk ceramics, the everyday ceramics and the skills involved in that we'll be having the benefit of being able to witness as well this afternoon. Sandra was part of a project called the Sangam Project, which was a 3-year initiative to talk with designers and craftspeople in Australia and India about the various interests involved in these sorts of collaborations and how those collaborations could be fairer and more productive on each side. And one of the key issues that came up with this was that of attribution, the name of the artisan being as something which continues as part of that. And here is Sandra talking to some potters from Delhi about this issue. And this led to a code of practice which was part of the Sangam. Sangam means confluence in Sanskrit. And it involved gaining permission in terms of supporting copying of designs, appreciation and respect of the creative contribution, so a dialogue with the artisan about this, a transparency in terms of the dealings that are done, particularly financial, and a willingness to complete those commitments, attribution, particularly in terms of not necessarily the name. For many potters, it's a matter of the name of the village and family rather than the individual. talking about all the various people involved in the supply chain. And this is something which is designed particularly for e-commerce, which is one of the big developments that's occurred in Asia at the moment, particularly in India, where there's much more emphasis on the story of the product, because e-commerce enables consumers to have video and other material so that they can get to know, or feel that they can get to know, the maker a lot more. And so in this case, this transparency is important and is designed to counteract the spectre of Rana Plaza, the sense that there is an alternative way, particularly in the sorts of relationships that are being forged between Australians in the Asian region. Another perspective that we've seen emerge in a kind of creative context is around the cultural exchange, the kind of alchemy, the merging of different cultures. And so the work that Vipu Srialasa has done, particularly in migrant communities and the diaspora, like the work that he had in Korea, dealing with Korean immigration and so on, working with clay as a form of self-expression about this, has been very important. And his wonderful exhibition, personally exploring this in Scott Livesey Gallery recently, earlier this year, looking at Australian settlement from a Buddhist perspective. So looking at the creatures, the flora and fauna, the rabbit and lantana that has taken over and ravaged Australia, but within a kind of a Buddhist sense of equanimity in terms of the ornateness, which is a kind of unsettling and strange way of thinking about things. And so this kind of cultural dialogue between Australia and Asia is very much around the idea that no culture is complete to itself, and that part of what migration does is that it enables not just a transfer of a culture somewhere else, but also the unravelling of that culture and its exploration and development of new facets, which certainly has been something which is enriching Australia, and the ceramicists are taking that further. And I think the very interesting camp that Vipu's got planned in Gimhae in Korea will explore this further later this year. And then tomorrow we have the pleasure of seeing the exhibition 6x6, looking at this dialogue in terms of Australia and India creatively. And so here's an example of Madhvi Subramanian's version of Jerry Wegg's Thong. Again, this sense that another culture can develop a different form of expression of something which is quite iconic and idiomatic in a partner culture. And it'll be very interesting to see all the different versions that are explored tomorrow in that. The other area of exchange is in terms of the politics of ceramics in Asia. We'll be hearing a bit more about that tomorrow afternoon when looking at the East Asian Ceramics Biennales. And I just wanted to make a couple of observations about that, because they are marvellous opportunities and pathways for us here in Australia. And I was a juror for the Zhongji Ceramics International Biennale a couple of occasions, and one of the things that really impressed me about the Koreans is that they desperately and were committed to the idea of their projects being international. So there was the same quota of Koreans as any other country, despite the fact that they were the hosts in the international show, which was very impressive. And but earlier this year I was in Daehua, which is part of the World Craft Council Cities of Craft program. And Daehua is partly in the southern China a factory for this kind of merchandise with Disney and so on. But this now is being reduced as the Vietnamese are outbidding the Chinese in terms of lower wages. And so there's a lot more interest in developing more creative explorations. And so part of what Daehua are doing is bringing various people of the world, like these African ceramicists who are visiting to make these sorts of international connections. And there are various master artisans, young creative people like Jung Yu, working with a lot of Western artists at the moment. And we're seeing that Dewa is now seeing itself in competition with Jingzhijian in terms of identifying itself as a porcelain capital. And there's talk now of a new ceramics biennale being developed in Dewa because China doesn't have one at the moment. So we benefit from this sense of competition and the feeling that competition for world leadership in terms of ceramics. This is one of Yung Yu's pieces. But finally, I wanted to hone in on one particular creative possibility, which was around entropy. This goes back 20 years ago when Ai Weiwei dropped that Han Dynasty vase. But we've seen a number of artists, like Pip McManus, the Australian one, explore this in terms of the video of the dissolution of the clay Buddha in a video. But a number of visual artists, like the Algerian Adel Abdesemed, using unfired clay. Unfired clay seems to be one of the interesting possibilities creatively, and this is there to reflect on the precariousness of workers in the Gulf states as these figures fall off the wall during the course of the exhibition. And the Argentinian Adrian Villarojas with this kind of punk ceramics referencing Kurt Cobain, which sort of grows potatoes and various things as it decomposes. But in Asia, I think there's another take on this. This is one of the most amazing installations I've seen in recent years by Fu Weng from Jingzhijian, referencing the Sichuan earthquake. But one artist, the final artist that I wanted to mention, is Korean Juri Kim, who makes these immaculate models of architecture which gradually dissolve in water, and one of these was at the Taiwan Ceramics Biennale. And most recently she showed this one, which was a recreation of an old housing estate, perfect recreation, but reflects for her, the critical sense of the other side of economic growth, which is the destruction side of it. But this is very influenced by Buddhist values, and but I think has some resonance in terms of what's happening in Australia, like the Terre à Terre collaboration, where these Melbourne-based ceramicists work with farmers to take the clay and slip cast ceramics that is used on the farm and then destroy it as part of a wedding ceremony at the end. And similarly, Sean Pascal's Australian Melbourne-based designer, who works with the chai cup makers in Dharavi in Mumbai, but put seeds in these cups so when they're thrown away, the flowers grow from it. So it's part of ecology. So the point I wanted to make at the end is that this notion relates to the Lao Tse's Taoist concept of Wu Wei, of the going with the flow, of the emptiness of things, offers an interesting perspective on ceramics as process as much as product. And in terms of going back to what Tanya Harrod was saying, that it is perhaps not so much a matter of born, not made, but unmade to be born again. Thank you.